Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm doing a reading wrap up for everything I read in the second half of July. The first book that I finished is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. This is a memoir of Maya Angelou, or sorry, it's an autobiography, and it's the first one in a series of I think maybe 7, and it covers her childhood growing up in the deep south as a black young girl, and it's kind of her from sort of birth through to like her mid to late teens, and it was generally interesting and a good read, but I do think one thing that for me personally hampered my enjoyment of it was I'm generally not very interested in people's childhoods. I find childhoods in general to be some of the least interesting parts of most autobiographies and memoirs, and I generally only enjoy them when there is like the adult bit to compare it to. So I enjoyed this more as it went along, so I am keen to read more from Maya Angelou. I think I would actually enjoy her other autobiographies as she does get older than this one in particular, but I can see why this is such the classic that it is and kind of so well renowned, and I am still pleased that I read it. And like, you can tell that Maya Angelou is a very talented writer. It's just subject matter wise I'm not that fussed about people's childhoods. The next book that I finished was The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. This is a contemporary romance which is about a woman who has to pretend to get along with the brother of her ex-fiance, and in theory the brother convinced the fiance to leave her at the altar. So it's kind of an enemies to lovers sort of thing. I wasn't overly impressed with this book. I generally really enjoyed the main woman protagonist, but I found that the main man protagonist was a little bit underdeveloped, and also there was a lot of like, we're throwing in too many tropes. Like there's kind of a mini fake dating skit in the middle. It just started to smack of like, I know contemporary romances are unrealistic in general, but this one was really stretching the kind of boundaries of disbelief for me. One thing I definitely did really enjoy, however, was some of the cultural context for it, because the main woman character was, I believe, Brazilian American. Please don't quote me for that, but from South America in general somewhere, and I really appreciate some of the little nods to it. And it's a tiny little thing, but when she was speaking in, I think, Spanish, basically there wasn't like the breaking the fourth wall translation. It was just kind of left up to the reader to get the kind of general context of what's being said, and like none of the important plot points were in that bit, but just little things like saying hello to her family weren't translated, and I like that. I think it's nice. It sort of embeds it into a context for you a bit more, and it doesn't require the sort of fourth wall explanation of what's being said. So I really liked the woman character, her family, etc, etc, but the romance itself for me was a little flat. Then I finished another non-fiction, and this is Cod by Mark Kurlansky. This is a micro history of cod and how it has functioned in various economics and kind of trading globally and historically. I enjoyed this book quite a lot. I think that Mark Kurlansky, he does a lot of micro histories, and I would definitely be inclined to pick up another one of his books again. He has quite a few out there. I thought it was really interesting, and it kind of spanning the different time periods. I preferred some of the more modern stuff. I thought it was more interesting when it was talking about some of the things in sort of the 20th century, and I also really liked the conversation about the ocean and who owns various bits of the ocean, and how far off of your coast can you claim areas of the sea for your country, and the kind of different conversations that were being had there. It also definitely addressed the issue of overfishing, and kind of that conversation was sort of an underlay across everything that this book was doing, so I really appreciated that. And also the ramifications of like, when overfishing does happen, how does that impact the communities who rely entirely on fishing as their sort of how they sustain themselves. One thing I wish it did a little bit more was included some more of the cultural implications and connotations of cod and its importance culturally to people. It was a little low on the ground for that, but it did include a bunch of recipes from all over the globe about how to prepare cod, and I did really appreciate those, even though I'm probably not going to try any of them myself because I don't personally like cooking. But I really liked that little nod, and I would have preferred to explore those recipes a bit more. Then I finished Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. This is a funky, speculative, sci-fi, weird thing, kind of slightly genre defying, but definitely in the speculative realm, and it is about a young girl who has several gods in her head, and she is an Banjé, I believe is how you pronounce it. It's linked with African folklore, and it's the idea of multiple gods in your head, and it's about her trying to deal with these different gods. Severe trigger warnings in this book for like eating disorders, sexual assault, depression. There's a lot going on in this book. It's a bizarre book to read, but I actually think it's definitely really worth a go. I think if you really like sort of quirky, playing with the narrative form, especially with like the authorial voice, it was doing a lot of really cool, weird stuff with that. I think that this is a fantastic book. It kind of reminded me in some places of the 5th season, specifically with what it was doing with the authorial voice, and I thought it was very, very interesting. I found it very jarring in places, but that's kind of the point to it, and I definitely would really like to try more from this author, because I think that they are doing very cool stuff, and I would be intrigued to see what else they could do. Also, it's made me very intrigued to read more about the Obelisk, which again, apologies if I am pronouncing that wrong. And I think mentioned in the book that this is also mentioned in the book Things Fall Apart. So I might be trying to pick that one up fairly soon, because it was something that I found very intriguing and interesting. Then I finished a really cute contemporary romance novella, or I guess kind of sci-fi romance novella by Alyssa Cole, which is The AI Who Loved Me. I thought that this was absolutely adorable. It's kind of telling you what it's doing in the title itself. It is in a dystopian future world where tech has completely controlled everything, and this young woman basically ends up looking after this guy who moves in with one of her neighbours, who apparently has gone through something and is recovering from something, but it turns out he's actually an artificial intelligence. He's not quite a robot, there's some sort of like biomechanical thing going on, and it's about her helping him and also discovering that he is a robot, and then discovering some stuff about herself. My only criticism of this of this book was because it was a novella, it was too short in my opinion, and actually I would have liked a full-blown novel to be able to explore what happened in this dystopian world and how they got to this point, and to have a chance to build up the relationship a little bit more. But I generally thought that it was really cute and really sweet and had some very cool things going on, and it's definitely shown that like Alyssa Cole is very hyped up on BookTube as a romance writer. She does both contemporary sci-fi and historical romance, and I think she has a thriller coming out soon. Like the woman is just multidisciplinary when it comes to genres, but I can see the hype around her, and I'm super excited to read some more of her stuff because I have several of her film novels on my Kindle, so this is definitely cemented like she's an interesting one to check out. Then I finished The Winter Crown by Elizabeth Chadwick. Basically we hit the point in the month where I had a bit of a, I don't like the phrase reading slump, because it wasn't so much that I couldn't focus on reading or anything, it was just that I wanted to do other things. So I watched Netflix, I listened to some podcasts, I generally kind of stopped reading for a little bit, and one thing I kind of twigged was like, I'm not actually excited about a lot of what is on my TBR right now, so I'm just going to go a bit off piste and ignore what I said I was going to read for the month. So this is where we get into like, Emma just reads other stuff and doesn't worry about it too much. So I read The Winter Crown by Elizabeth Chadwick, which is technically on my August TBR. I started a bunch of things early. This is book 2 in her trilogy, and it is a historical fiction focused on the life of Eleanor Aquitaine, who is a real historical person. According to the cover, she is one of history's or Britain's most powerful women. She had a ridiculously cool, very long life, and she was very, very instrumental in very important things happening in the UK in, I think it's like the 11 to 1200s, sometime around sort of then. So book 2 is focused on her marriage with Henry. I can't remember which Henry, one of the Henrys, and I listened to this audiobook. I generally really, really love the series. Totally going to finish it off soon. I would definitely recommend it, and it's a fascinating blurring of the line between fact and fiction, because it isn't just inspired by her life, it is like basically dramatizing her life, and I really appreciate that. Then I read The Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin. This is book 2 in the Broken Earth trilogy. This is such a cool series. Like, I know a lot of people have hyped it, but it's so worth the hype. This is a fantasy slash maybe pushing on the edge of sci-fi world, where basically the world is very geologically unstable, so there are lots of kind of mini extinction events that occur relatively regularly, and because of that, society's developed in such a way that some people have the ability to almost like magically control certain parts of the elements to help to stabilize things, but these are a group of people who have been very oppressed by the rest of society and kind of mistreated and mistrusted and used by various ruling classes of the society. Book 1 is about a massive extinction event going on, and also has 2 other timelines happening. Book 2 is focused on a side character from book 1, and then our main character from book 1 picking up with the kind of current timeline to do with this mass extinction event. I don't want to go into crazy amounts of detail because obviously like I don't want to spoil anything from book 1, but one thing I really enjoyed in this was I loved the conversation it was having between like when you have a skill set that has been taught by like an education establishment, and the kind of rules and restrictions and lack of creativity that get overlaid over that, and then how people who haven't learnt whatever the thing is, in this case the magic system, when they've learnt it more on the fly, actually based, kind of grounded in the real world, sort of like practically speaking rather than theoretically, the different ways that they develop, and how when you aren't told that something is impossible, you are more likely to be able to do it. And I just thought it was having some really fun and interesting conversations about teaching and learning skills, and how we understand who is and isn't good at something. So that's kind of a little side conversation going on in this book that I was kind of picking up on. It's doing some really cool stuff. I've just started book 3. I think this series is so fucking cool. I'm totally going to read more N.K. Jemisin. Loving it. Then I read Me and White Supremacy by Layla F. Saad. This is actually kind of like a non-fiction workbook, which I didn't fully realise going into it. It is a book looking at race and white supremacy, and each chapter is designed to be a particular facet of white supremacy, and asking the reader to critically examine their life and their interactions to look at how their own personal experiences interact with white supremacy. It's designed for white people to be able to use to assess their relationships with race, basically. I wasn't fully aware of that going in. That's my bad for not researching it properly. So what I've kind of done is I've done a cover to cover read of this book, with engaging with some aspects of it but not all of it. And then what I am doing now is, me and my friend Catherine, she's got a copy, and we are going to work through it together, having more actual conversations about what is in the book. So I've read the book and I've touched on some of the work, but I would not say I've done the work yet. Some of it is more or less relevant to certain people, but dependent on like your lifestyle, demographically where you are, and also when you're in a pandemic and you don't leave the house ever, so you don't ever talk to anybody regardless of their race. That's sad. But it's, you know, there are going to be bits that are more or less applicable, but in terms of like as an actual practical useful way of looking at your own internal biases and sort of your own internalized white supremacy, I think this is the best book out there ever, and it could definitely be used as a blueprint for oppression in general, and looking at how you interact with oppression, because whilst it is obviously having conversations about race, a lot of it you could cut and paste in other things, and I think it is a really useful jumping off point for that. Not to try and diminish what it's doing about race, it was just an observation that actually there aren't that many books out there that really help you, like help an individual to critically look at themselves. And whilst it's all very well reading books on racism or anti-racism and like feminism or anything like that, actually reading about the statistics and stuff around the topic, or being given prompts that then help you to really look internally, are two very different processes, and whilst both are equally important, actually this is the kind that doesn't often get a book about it. So I think that this is fantastic and really helpful and really interesting, and I'm definitely excited to jump back into it and to work through particular sections of it that are really relevant to me and my life, and to do that with Catherine, to have somebody to talk about these things with. So very, very interesting book, and would heavily recommend to everyone. And then the final book that I finished, but I am going to talk about a couple of DNFs, so don't go away, but the final book I finished was Within the Sanctuary of Wings by Marie Brennan. This is book 5 in the Lady Trent series, and it is the final book, so I have finished off another series, which I'm very excited about. That was the goal for August, so jump started that a bit early. This one was probably actually in some ways my least favourite of the series. Not because it was particularly bad, but just because Marie Brennan made some decisions plot-wise that I just personally wouldn't have gone down that road. I feel like when you approach something like a fantasy or sci-fi book, there's like an expected level of, the first book in a series kind of establishes like, this is how much magic-y stuff you can expect, like this is the level of removed from our reality you're going to expect. And I just feel like Marie Brennan in this book just kind of kicked it up a notch in a way that was like, nothing had really indicated that this was what was going to happen from the earlier books. And for me personally, I either would have preferred her not to do that at all and to have wrapped up the series in a slightly different way, or to have done that a lot earlier in the series and given her more room to explore some of the ideas. Because this particular thing that happens that I don't want to spoil, when it does, there are all sorts of really big ramifications for the world that there really wasn't the room to explore in this. So whilst I really love this series, I think it's totally worth a read, and I still definitely enjoy this. I think I gave it 4 stars or like 8 out of 10 or whatever. Like, it's a solid book. She does a good job with what she does. I just personally wouldn't have done that if I was her. Okay, now I'm going to talk about 2 books that I DNF'd. I might have DNF'd more, but these are the 2 that I want to like actually talk to you about exactly why. One of them was the beast that I was continuing with for such a long time, and that is David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. I've officially given up. I can't, guys. I just can't. It's too long, it's too long-winded, and it reads just like a soap opera. Like, there's all these kind of almost episodic elements to it. There are these characters who come back in and come back out, and like, I just don't care. But I don't watch soap operas. I don't really enjoy content in that format regardless of what media it's in, and I'm not getting enough out of kind of the social commentary to justify it. And I had like, you know, I'm probably over halfway through, but that still means I've got like a solid 400 pages or something left, or like a ridiculous number of hours on audiobook, and I just kept avoiding it and kept avoiding it. And I think once I DNF this, I was like, actually I feel very free to start reading whatever I want now, because I don't feel this thing dragging around my neck. So I've just given up. I've not given up completely on Dickens entirely, but I think David Copperfield is the wrong one for me. And then the final one I just wanted to talk about that I really did not enjoy and ended up DNFing about a third of the way in was Sex with Kings by Eleanor Harman. This was a non-fiction book, non-fiction like historical book, that was looking at mistresses and the role of the mistress in various like royal courts and things like that. And for me, this book really exemplifies the fact that just because you are a member of an oppressed group in society does not mean that you will necessarily be sympathetic to the struggles of that oppressed group. And what I mean by this is like, what I was expecting from this book was a nuanced discussion about the lack of power women have had historically, and the different ways that they could grab power, and the way that they would end up using things like their body, and the role that the queen and the mistress would play, and the decisions that would be ended up making with like a sympathetic lens to why people would make these decisions, and just a general conversation around what it was like to be a noble woman, where you're better off than the majority of the population, but you're still trapped and stuck and relatively powerless. Instead, what happened was I just had pages and pages of tabloid style slagging off of women, and I really feel like Eleanor Harman's women historically fall into, you know, one of very few categories of like guileless idiot, like harpy, shrew bitch, ugly as a dog, the prettiest thing on the planet. Like, they were so stereotypical. All of the kings were just these poor hapless men who had these absolute like succubus style shrews who were bleeding them dry, and it lacked all of the nuance that I wanted from it. It also was structured really badly. In some ways, if I felt like I was learning a lot from it, then I might have been able to put that aside, and I do say might because it really fucked me off every time. But it structurally wasn't very sound. I feel like it was doing a quantity over quality thing, and part of me was like, well, maybe I should just finish it, because then I'm gonna find out about all these women that I will then go and read a different book on, and then I'll get more information about them. But it was kind of rattling through the same sort of names that I already pretty much knew about in history anyway, so I decided to leave it because I didn't want to, like, you know, just go, this is not a good book. And I think it really exemplifies that idea of like history, and if anything, like, is in the eye of the beholder, and there's a tendency to treat non-fiction like it's gospel, and actually no, everything is subjective, because that's the only way that humans can interact with anything on the planet. And actually, if we're talking about something like history, you know, the person writing it is very important, but just because they're a woman doesn't mean they're going to be sympathetic to women, in the same way that I'm pretty sure there are going to be other historical books out there for people who fit into other oppressed categories that are not necessarily going to be sympathetic to those oppressed categories. Like, it's not just enough to be like box ticking exercise, oh, you are a woman, therefore this is going to be a good book and a feminist book. In the same way that, like, you know, I've read books written by men who were far more sympathetic and far more accurate and more interesting, and just better done, I don't know if that's even a sentence, than this particular example. So yeah, so that was the two that I DNF'd. There may have been more in there, but those are the two that I like felt strongly about, that I wanted to explain why I DNF'd them in particular, because I also know some people were interested in the book Sex with Kings, and I really would not recommend it. I think that there must be better books out there than that. So that is it from me. Slightly different filming setup just because I'm feeling really tired and lazy. Don't worry, we'll go back to our normally scheduled setting in the next video. Have a wonderful reading week, and I'm going to chat to you soon. Bye!